really, I think probably the most important lesson that I took away from it was don't listen to a type of music, just listen to music of all
Yeah.
types. I remember my brother getting Gershwin's Rhapsody in Blue for my mom for a Christmas present. And I sat listening to that thinking, I don't think I've ever heard anything more beautiful in my life than this. I was just blown away. And so even though I'm not, not seeped in classical music, you just kind of go, wow, there's just some really good stuff.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to a new episode of Set Listing Bruce, your podcast all about Bruce Springsteen, his music, and mostly his fans. I am your host, Jesse Jackson, and joining me today is a new friend. It's a connection. Chris, introduce yourself, please.
Oh, thanks, Jesse. I'm honored to be here. I'm Chris Coleman. I am a long-term, almost lifelong Bruce fan. Dating back to the mid 70s. I'm currently the head of Twin Cities Habitat for Humanity, building houses for people in need. And before that, I had a career as the mayor of St. Paul for 12 years.
Oh,
And
very
on the
nice.
city council. And one of Bruce's favorite places has always been St. Paul. So I've been very fortunate. Not quite the same as being on the East Coast, but Bruce comes through St. Paul a lot. Started a lot of his tours in St. Paul. So we've had a lot of fun over the years.
Yeah, we had just had Betsy on the show, and I had asked her, I said, okay, when you're mayor, like, do you get to, like, have you ever done, made it Bruce Springsteen Day or something? And she's like, well, he always goes to St. Paul. And so that's what she said. You got to talk to Chris. So,
Yeah, well,
yeah.
it actually is one of my favorite stories
Hmm.
of my Bruce fandom over the years. Geez, I'm trying to think even which tour it was, but it was when I was mayor,
Hmm.
and we declared it Bruce Springsteen Day in the city of St. Paul, and we renamed the street outside the XL Energy Center E Street.
Yeah,
And
they just released that show on the archives.
yeah, yeah,
It did. Yeah, the November 12th, 2012, right? It was the Wrecking Ball tour, and
yeah.
so and he talked about that, right? Like, oh, the street,
Uh,
yes.
Yeah, he mentioned it, but the funny story was, so I finally got it. I finally, after begging for years just to have a chance to say hi to Bruce and the gang, I was down in the hallway as they were making their way out to the stage, and Stevie comes by and he starts talking with Jerry Michelson from Jam Productions and a couple of the
Mhm.
other folks from the XL, and Jerry introduces him to me, and Stevie could really had no particular interest in talking to a politician, I
Yes.
suspect, which I don't blame him, right?
Yeah.
Um, but so he starts walking towards the stage, and about 10 yards down the runway or the hallway, he sees this proclamation, and he stops and he reads it. It's all dialed up, and he comes back and he goes only a weekend. I go, what do you mean? He goes, you gonna name the street after us for a weekend? I go, hey, we got a lot of people coming through. We can't we can't tie up the street forever. And he says, and he says, oh, I suppose Prince would be mad if you named it after us permanently. I said, Prince is from Minneapolis. What the f do I care what Prince thinks? at which at which point Stevie hit me in the chest. He goes, yeah, you're okay. And then introduced me to Bruce. So that was kind of my funny moment about naming anything after Bruce Springsteen and the E Street Band.
That is awesome. That I just can see little Steven doing that. That is amazing. That is so much fun. Um, so before we get to your origin story, how are you doing during all this craziness?
You know, it's interesting because having been mayor for 12 years, and you're in the thick of all kinds of things, and we certainly had our challenges and struggles over the
Yeah.
years. Everybody says, "Well, you must be glad to not be mayor right now, or in some other office." And I said, the thing is, I always wanted to be engaged and be as helpful as I could be, trying to help us get through challenges. And boy, no more challenging time than right now. Between the civil unrest after George Floyd's murder in Minneapolis has just been devastating. The effects of COVID on families, and the devastating effect on the mental health for our children is just hard. So, from a habitat perspective, we're continuing to do what we can to put people in houses, give them the
Hmm.
stability that home provides. And so, uh, you know, I'm too blessed to complain about my own my
Yeah.
own misery getting through this. I'm not. It would be really unfair of me to complain, because I really am blessed.
Yeah.
But I think all of us are struggling in different ways.
Yeah, I think we are, and this is a crazy time, and I've talked about this a couple times on the show. I certainly think in the grand scheme of things, um, the loss of proms and graduation ceremonies and concerts not attending are not important, but they are things we've missed, having a
Yeah,
big gathering at Christmas or Thanksgiving. And I do think once we get past this, we'll have to mourn that and get
yeah,
used to it again. So I am glad. Yeah, I mean, it's just, I mean, you're right there in a lot of some of the craziness. And, I'm here in Texas, and it, we're it feels like we don't have a plan, our state government, and I worry, and we're trying to
well,
do the
I
best we can.
yeah, well, I suspect your listeners are all over the place politically, but I'm happy
Yeah.
to have an adult in the White House. you
Yes,
know
absolutely. And
uh
I am, and I am too. I'm glad to have someone, and and I agree with you, Chris. I remember I have had multiple levels of leadership roles, never anything like a mayor, but I know that you when there's a problem, you want to be there to help fix it. And I could see from your perspective, it's not like, oh boy, I'm glad this didn't happen with me. It's like, oh my gosh, I wish I was there so I could try to help things get better.
right,
Yeah.
right, yeah, and do what you need to do to assist, and to really be on the lookout for people, and make it about something other than yourself. Any politician, and everybody gets accused of it, but if you're making it about yourself, then you're going to fail in your job. Obviously your ego is going to be invested in it. Obviously you want to have people think kindly of you, but at the end of the day, what matters is that you do what you're supposed to do. And I'd rather have a chapter in Profiles in Courage than have some sycophants that are tweeting how great I am.
Yeah.
Uh,
And I agree. And we'll get off politics in a minute, I promise. But
yeah, yeah,
the one of the things, right, is that regardless of the side of the aisle, in the past, you would say, um, everyone was trying to do what they thought was best for the country and its people.
right,
And I do
right,
not know in the past 4 years that has been the case.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, listen, we need opposing points of view to make
Yes.
democracy work, but we also need people to be honest in
Yeah.
their points of view. So
Absolutely. Yeah.
hopefully we'll get back to more of that.
Oh, absolutely. So talk about growing up. Where did you grow up in?
Born and raised in St. Paul.
Oh, wow.
Oh yeah, I
Local
was
boy
born
means
in
good, huh?
yeah. I don't know how good I made, but I never got too far away from the hospital. They didn't cut the umbilical cord; they just tied it to the to the hospital bed. I couldn't get very far.
What kind of,
But
I was going to ask, what kind of music did your family listen to? Was there a lot of music in the house when you were younger?
the interesting thing is the music that was in our house was I had an older brother who was 11 years older than me. We're a big Irish Catholic family, and about the time he was old enough to start going to bars, the Irish music scene started to kind of pop a little bit in the city of St. Paul. And so he would go out and about midnight or 1 o'clock in the morning on a Friday or Saturday night, all of a sudden people would start streaming into our basement, and we'd have a Kaylee in our basement, once or twice a month. And we had some of the finest Irish musicians around. Actually, there was a young woman at the time who seemed very old to me, but she was probably about 24 at the time. She had never played an instrument in her life, and she ended up going on to become an Irish harp player. That I believe that if she didn't win, she was competing in the Irish National Championships. So it was just this amazing amalgam. And of course, in the upstairs floor of the house where my brothers had their bedrooms, they had a little, one of those old stereos that you took, you collapse the speakers into the stereo. And so, whenever a new Beatles album came out, or any of the, this was in the height of the Vietnam War. My brother graduated from high school in '68, and another brother in '70. And so all their friends would gather, and sit around and listen to just, some of the great influential music of all time. And, I particularly remember, listening to all of the Beatles albums, sitting up there. And I'd sneak up there if my brothers weren't around. I'd sneak up there. If they ever caught me, they'd punch me and tell me never to go back up there. But I'd go back up there and fumble through the records. And Van Morrison was a huge influence at the time, and some of these other groups that they were listening to. And then, of course, as I got a little bit older, I started evolving into my own tastes.
Yeah, often we talk about siblings a lot on the podcast, where you either are influenced to the positive by your older siblings, or sometimes to almost you find your own music almost in spite of, like, well, I don't want to take my brother or older sister's music, I want to find my own. Sounds like you found a kind of middle ground, right? Like you love their music, and then as you started growing, you find your own.
Exactly. That they had pretty good taste in music. One of the groups at the time that was hanging around the Twin Cities, of course, was Kerner, Ray, and Glover. One of the first, really important blues groups, white blues groups that was playing. When John Lennon and the Beatles first came to America, they asked John what he wanted to do, and he said, "I want to go hear some Kerner, Ray, and Glover." And they were playing on the West Bank, the same streets that Bob Dylan first walked when he was starting out at the University of Minnesota. And so they, just interesting eclectic mix of music that they listened to. And that really, I think probably the most important lesson that I took away from it was, don't listen to a type of music, just listen to music of all types.
That's good. That's really
I remember, quite frankly, my brother getting Gershwin's Rhapsody in Blue for my mom for a Christmas present. And I sat listening to that thinking, I don't think I've ever heard anything more beautiful in my life than this. I was just blown away. And so even though I'm not steeped in classical music, just kind of go, wow, there's just some really good stuff out there.
Brian Wilson from the Beach Boys had talked about Gershwin. He did an album of Gershwin covers, but he talked about Rhapsody in Blue as one of the most beautiful things he'd ever heard. So that's absolutely.
Yeah. Wow.
Do you remember when you discovered Bruce?
Yeah. So there are kind of three phases of my discovering Bruce. First of all, my sister had a collection of records. It seemed like I was the last person to get my own record player or something. But
We're the youngest.
Second to the youngest. Yep. So, and actually, I have an older brother who's actually a professional musician. Used to tour with Judy Mowat. If you know Judy, she was one of the I3s one of Bob Marley's singers. And so he was, obviously music was just a big part of our growing up. But my sister had Born to Run. And so I'd sneak in to her room every once in a while and play that disc. And that was about it. So that was probably 76 or even early 77. And then in 77, he came into town to do the Darkness tour. And my dad said, well, I've never been to a rock and roll concert before. And Bruce was on the cover of Newsweek and Time, seeing the future of rock and roll. His name is Bruce Springsteen. and so my dad got us all tickets. He was mad because he had pulled strings and all he could get was 15th row center
Yeah.
for the
Wow.
concert. And we're like, I had seen exactly. I think I'd seen one concert before that, and it was Jethro Tull. That was
Okay.
the first concert I'd ever been to. And so we all go down shortly before, right around Thanksgiving, Christmas, when they were doing Santa Claus is Coming to Town and the Mitch medley at the end and
Mm-hmm.
all those things, and we just sat there, and I was, never seen anything like it.
Yeah.
Bruce in his ultimate prime.
Yeah.
And the whole group, and just so tight and so just the greatest thing ever. And then a few years later, I was out working in Glacier National Park. I spent my summers working in waiting tables and bartending and things in Glacier and the Tetons, and got to be really good friends with a guy from Northern California, still one of my best friends to this day, 40 years later. And he was deep into Bruce, and he was into the Wild Innocent and the East Street Shuffle and Greetings from Asbury Park, and so that's when I started listening to Something Beyond Darkness and Born to Run. And after that, that was it. that was it was all over for me in terms of my depth and my love for Bruce and the band.
Did your dad enjoy the show?
Well, when they started passing a joint down the row, he was the majority leader of the Minnesota State Senate at the time.
Okay.
So it was a little. He was like, okay, this is maybe not the best way. Yeah, he liked it, but he didn't like it in the way. I mean, I think it was a spectacle for him to be able to that he was at, as opposed to the rest of us that were just absolutely knocked off our feet.
Chris, can you, and I always ask this, and sometimes it's hard to do, can you articulate what about Bruce's music, once you got down that rabbit hole, spoke to you?
Yeah, first of all, it's just great music. I mean, let's just start there. So you can analyze lyrics, and you can talk about storytelling, and you can talk about all that stuff. But Bruce being the musician that he is, and being the font of knowledge of music, I still maintain that the Seeger sessions were as good as anything that's ever been put together musically in the history. I mean, just the incredible musicians, so much brass up on the stage, and Bruce's appreciation for music and how it shaped him and his songs is just incredible. Maybe the way that I can tell that story is, so a couple of years after my dad took us to, not to get maudlin, but after he took us to the show in '78, he got cancer. And as he was in treatment and ultimately passed away, it was the River Tour.
Yeah.
And I remember sitting in the audience listening to Independence Day.
Yeah.
And thinking about my own relationship with my dad, and thinking about what that meant for who I was as a person, and I was 18, just kind of coming into adulthood or whatever, and nothing has ever hit me as emotionally as that. And I really think about that's Bruce just tells a story that so many of us can relate to, and so many of us can say, in the Broadway show where he says that amazing line at the beginning. He says, "I wasn't singing my stories about my life. I was singing stories about my dad's life."
Yes.
And that really hit me, because he has so much empathy for stories that weren't his own.
Yeah.
And his ability to relate to others. And so it was very relatable to me, not because I was living a life like the stories that were being told in Bruce's songs, but I think in the same way that Bruce was appreciative of others. But then there were those times, like on Independence Day, that it did connect to my own life in a way that just hit me deep.
So I was a casual fan of Independence Day, didn't dislike the song, but when he this River tour where they were doing the anniversary, they were doing the album in a row, all in a row, and
Hmm.
it hit
Incredible.
me that he was now he was telling the story from the father's perspective now. He
Hmm.
wrote it as a young man, and now then he's singing it from the father's perspective, and seeing that, I thought, was made the song very powerful.
Yeah.
And the idea that he talked about two people that loved each other and just didn't know how to say it. um, and there are times when I have that issue with my son, and there definitely
Hmm.
is times when my wife and my son had that battle, both strong. And so um, I could certainly see that, the thought of that and how it would mean, especially with your
Yeah.
father fighting this and knowing ultimately, he was gone.
Yeah. 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 That's right. And yeah, I do think about it from the perspective. I have a 28 and a 25-year-old daughter and son, respectively, and
Yeah.
they're both fantastic. But I'm headstrong; they're headstrong,
Yes, exactly.
and particularly me and my daughter, we can get
Hmm.
into it like
Yeah.
nobody's business, and yeah, so maybe Independence Day is the right song for that too.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I truly do. I do. I always like to preface this, Chris, with the amount of times you've seen him perform live is certainly not a fair barometer of how big of a fan you are. But have you counted how many times you've seen him?
Yeah, I don't. I will say that I don't have an absolute for certain count,
Okay.
and I kind of have to go through each one. And I will preface it, but I've seen him a lot. But I'm living in Minnesota. If you're living on the East Coast, it's a lot. I always laugh when Chris Christie used to brag about how many times he'd seen him. I
Yes.
go, yeah, you live in New Jersey. How hard you walk across the street to see Bruce? Come on, it's not that
Exactly.
hard. But I have seen Bruce somewhere in the mid to high 80s.
Okay.
I've seen the first one in '77. Saw two of the River. Saw two of the three shows that he did on Born in the USA, including the one where they filmed Dancing in the Dark. Um, anytime he came, particularly if they came multiple nights, I was there over the last 40 plus years. But then
Hmm.
I'd get a chance to, and I even count, like I went down. He was in Madison, Wisconsin. My daughter was going to school there at the time, and he came and did a rally for Obama.
Right.
Um, I count that. I count seeing him perform with Bob Seger at the inaugural, or not Bob Seger,
Yeah.
Pete Seeger at the inaugural.
Were you there?
Yeah, yeah, that
Wow.
was, yeah, wow is the right word. That was on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial.
Yeah.
But saw Ghost of Tom Joad, saw, all of the solo shows and the various and the incarnations, including Seeger sessions. And so, when you add it all up, somewhere in the 80s.
That's pretty impressive. Um, i- and you're right. Like, yeah, there is the East Coast, and most of them will admit that, right? Like, I've been blessed. I became a fan very early. I'm living in the Philadelphia area or Jersey area. Um, any thoughts about last Wednesday night when they Bruce did Land of Hope and Dreams and on the steps of the memorial?
Yeah, first of all, I love that song.
That's my
Um,
favorite Springsteen song. If I had
yeah,
to pick
yeah.
one, it would be it. Yeah.
It's so hard to say which one is my favorite, but that is a song that I can't get enough of. So
Yeah.
there'll be times where I'll play it three times in a row. Just
Yes, absolutely.
um, and I mean that's what you said. What drew you to Bruce? That's the kind of thing that the perfect the perfect words of healing at a time where this country was desperately in need.
Yeah.
And so to come in at the night of the inaugural, after everything that happened on the 6th, after everything that's been going on in this country for so long, after the COVID, has killed 400,000 people, the land of hope and dreams, and I hope that it really is that, and
Yes.
I think it's aspirational more than declarational.
I think so too. I like the idea that, we'll take what we can carry and we'll leave the rest,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and so, yeah, I, it is my favorite song if I have to pick one. And there was a funny point, right, where they were going to, I've shared this before in the show, but it hasn't aired yet. They talked about it now, Justin Timberlake doing Better Days. And I went, what? Better Days? Why is it Bruce? And I was like, oh, wrong song. So
Yeah, different. Yeah,
yeah. That's pretty good. So, well, I don't know if you could top your little Steven story, but do you have other stories from shows that you might want to share?
Oh yeah, I mean, having the opportunity to the first time I had an opportunity to get, well, here's kind of a funny story. So when you're mayor, you don't get free tickets, even though as I always say, it was the building that we the
Yeah,
city owned
exactly.
and all
Yeah.
that stuff. And as a council member, it's like, no, you don't get to go for free. You get to pay. So on the Rising tour, he came, and I was on the city council at the time, and of course everybody thinks that you're the access to tickets, and so
Yeah.
I called up the manager of the X at the time, and I said, hey, Jack, I need to get some tickets for Springsteen. He goes, oh yeah, sure, no problem. Give me your credit card number. Gave him the credit card number. He goes, well, how many do you need? I go, 32. he goes, what? He goes, 32. He goes, can you? I go, like, Jack, everybody's calling me. They want, particularly with the Rising and after 9/11.
Yeah.
Everybody. So he's like, okay, and how many thousands of dollars
Yeah.
my credit card company called and said, what, somebody must have stolen your credit card. I'm like, no,
Unfortunately, no. Yes.
Yeah, unfortunately, no. I think I got paid back for most of them. But there was a funny moment where one of our very best friends, a woman one of my wife's best friends, and she had grown up very, she grew up in a Bruce Springsteen song. She grew up in Elyria, Ohio.
Okay.
Her backyard was the freeway. Her dad had to leave for months at a time to try to find any kind of work to support the family. And so she and I really bonded over our love for Bruce. And whenever she and her husband and Connie and I would go on our trips, Ann and I would sit in the car singing all the Springsteen songs together and annoying the hell out of the other two. And so I had 2 tickets. There's another story attached to that, but I won't bore you. I had 2 wristbands to get onto the floor.
Okay.
So my buddy from California, who I talked about that I worked in Glacier with, had flown in for the show. He had seen Bruce dozens and dozens of times, but had never been anywhere close to the stage. But he comes in, so the 2 of us are sitting on the floor right in front of the stage, and I looked up into the audience, and I saw our friend Ann, and you could see the envy and the jealousy on her face, like, oh my God, I can't believe it. This is so I went up into the crowd, got her, and I said, Ann, come with me. You're my wife for the evening. And I kind of city council membered my way onto the floor with Ann.
Right.
She didn't have a wristband.
Oh, that's funny.
And about halfway through the show, Bruce is walking the catwalk, and he stands right in front of her, and he does one of those shakes. And Bruce puts a lot of energy to the show. There's a lot of perspiration.
Yes,
and he shakes, and she just gets covered in his sweat. And she turns to me and she goes, anything you want from me for the rest of your life, I will do. So fast forward a few years later, I get elected mayor, and I said, Ann, I want you to be my deputy mayor. And she says, oh, I don't know that I can do that. I go, remember Bruce? And she goes, okay, yeah, you got me.
Oh, how funny.
So she was my deputy mayor, my first deputy mayor.
That's hilarious. Well, so I don't know if you remember, but if you do, I would love to hear your side of, because Betsy shared the story about you pushed her so she could touch Bruce.
Yeah.
So I'd love to hear your side of that story.
Well, listen, I appreciate, first of all, that you have to understand the dynamic in the Twin Cities, which for years the 2 cities were kind of rivals more than they were Twin Cities. or maybe they were fighting twins, whatever. But when I got elected mayor and Betsy's predecessor, and he and I started to actually act together, and then so it
Okay.
became really a big thing. And then Betsy becomes mayor, and I mean, we were friends anyways beforehand, but just really always enjoyed her, and she was a Bruce fan. So so I'm trying to remember the specifics because there are a couple of different aspects of the story, but you know how, I mean, there's a couple of things where when you're in the crowd and Bruce is going to do the crowd surf. I remember the first time I had my son on the floor, and all of a sudden the security guard starts pushing my son, and I was, I'm getting really
Sure.
parental on this thing, and I'm getting really mad. Going, why is he pushing my son? I can't. What is he doing? And then I realized that they were trying to get the scrum together so that
Yeah.
Bruce could do the crowd surf. So I think it was something along those lines where they're starting to form the crowd. And I'm like, come on, Betsy, get over here. And then the next thing, Bruce is kind of flying above her, and she's kind of that same thing of like whatever, and I've that's actually been one of the funnest things I've been able to do is to kind of to help others have that experience, because when you're 2 inches from Bruce and he's giving it us all, that's just it's like a hurricane.
Yeah. It really is, and it's that the idea of how passionate he is and how much he continues to strive and kind of um, keep pushing the boundaries. Like I don't know, do you have any thoughts on Letter to You, the latest album?
I will be honest in saying that I haven't listened to it fully.
Okay.
I kind of I know the title song,
Yeah.
which I really enjoy, and I think is really a nice song for the time and for the time in his life and all those things. I'm not really conversant on that.
Okay.
Shit. Just kind of we'll get. I know that I will get to that in due time.
In due time, yes.
Yeah, but
Go ahead.
one of the things I don't think people understand how much Bruce gives. When he was doing the whole river tour, and then you're exhausted after he gets through all the songs on the river, and he was just getting started.
Yes, absolutely.
And he was almost doing his 3-hour marathon shows, and I was in a position on that tour where I could see that he would go back behind the all of the equipment, and he would just lay down in between, and just like rest for 3 minutes while people are calling for an encore, because he had given it everything.
Yeah. Wow.
And that is, I find very few musicians that are at Bruce's stage in his career that deserve to fill up a large arena, and he fills it as well as he did when I first saw him in '78.
Yeah. I certainly understand people, if you do not like the new album or didn't like Western Stars or everything, but I was really offended. Someone posted on Facebook, one of the Springsteen groups, that Bruce should quit releasing new music because he's destroying his legacy. And I went, okay, dude.
Yeah, you don't get who he is. You don't understand.
Yeah.
And by the way, Bruce isn't fixed in time at 22 years old and at the Stone
Exactly.
Pony.
Yeah.
I mean, he gets to mature like everybody else, and tell it. I mean, if I had to go back in time and say which albums could I have done without, it was, Tunnel of Love, even though there were some good songs on that kind of phase in his career that didn't speak to me particularly. But that was where he was at. So who am I to judge?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, he shouldn't have released those albums. I'm like, that's where he was at.
Yeah, exactly.
That was his. That's what music is about. That's what art is about.
Yeah. I do want to just go a little bit. Talk about your work with the Habitat for Humanity a little bit.
Yeah. So Thanks for asking, because it really means a lot to me
Yeah.
to be able to be in this position. First of all, Habitat for Humanity is um, one of the great organizations of all time. There's myth around it. First of all, everybody thinks Jimmy Carter started it, which he didn't, but he and Rosalind are our two biggest and best volunteers.
Yeah.
And people think, well, they build homes and they give them to people for free. Well, they don't. People have to take out a mortgage and do all of those things, but we make it affordable for them so that they don't have to pay more than 30% of their income for their housing. But when I was mayor in my previous life, I've done everything. I was a public defender for a long time. I was a prosecutor for a while. I've done a bunch of different jobs. But I've seen kind of the humanity from a lot of different perspectives and the challenges that people face and why they face them, and the systemic racism that underlies so much of the issues that we see in our society.
Yeah.
And I think nowhere does that systemic racism play out more than the lack of access to affordable home ownership.
Right.
Systematic denial of African Americans' opportunity to buy. When my dad came back from World War II, he grew up dirt poor. My mom grew up even poorer, and he came back as a veteran, and he was able to buy a house on the GI Bill, and then he built equity, and then he was as the family grew, he was able to build a bigger house. And when I was in law school, I was able to buy a house because my mom had resources, because she had built equity in her homes.
Right.
That she could, I always say, like most people, I went to the First National Bank of mom and dad to borrow money for my down payment, and that opportunity was denied. So if you were an African American veteran coming back from World War II, having served your country overseas, having put your life at risk, you weren't able to access the GI Bill, not because the law said that you couldn't, but because of the way banks loan money, because of the way that communities redlined areas where African Americans could buy houses. And so the effects of that decision post World War II, which is not all that long ago, ripple today, where less than 25% of African American families in Minnesota own their own homes, and 75+% of the white community owns their own home in the state. And so that means that the average wealth of an African American family is pennies on the dollar of the average white family, because they don't have that equity built, and that has ripple effects. Think about it during the time of COVID. Where home has become everything. It's now your office.
Yeah.
It's your gym. It is your classroom. It is everything. And if you don't have the stability of a home, and you don't have the financial wealth that accumulates as a result of owning a home and having that investment, then you're denied the opportunities that I was given as a child of a returning veteran from World War II.
Yeah.
And so we see these ripple effects, and we really, if we're going to solve disparities in healthcare outcomes, if we're going to solve disparities in educational outcomes and in economic standing, all of these things, I really fundamentally believe that it starts with the ability of people to buy homes. And so we're playing our role in the Twin Cities. We have affiliates across the country, and of course, Habitat actually started off building homes overseas for communities in Africa, and now we have relationships in countries all across the globe. I think somewhere in the 80s, different countries that we build homes in. And so it's really truly a remarkable faith-based organization, but it's really about serving all people wherever they're at, and hopefully we can move the needle on these inequalities that we see, particularly playing out now with COVID.
One of the things that, and I know just a little bit about the charity, but the idea, what is the old parable, right? Like all the fish have the ocean have hit the beach, right? And they're all flopping around, and someone picks the fish and throws it back in there. Well, you aren't doing anything. Well, I made a difference for that one fish, right?
Yep, absolutely.
And go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, so I always have liked that story.
Yeah.
But we can't be satisfied by saving one starfish.
Right. Exactly.
That first of all, we're a better country than that.
Yes.
And second of all, if we want to be an even better country, then we have to address this underlying inequality. There's just, you can't sustain this. First of all, the disappearing middle class is real. I mean, the haves and the have-nots. You look at what billionaires have done under COVID, where they have increased their wealth. I heard one statistic that something I won't quote it correctly, but if you just took the wealth that the billionaires have accumulated since the beginning of the COVID virus,
Yeah.
and gave like $5,000 to every family at some level, whatever the, I
Yeah.
mean, I don't know the specifics, but it was just one of those, ridiculously, holy cow, the
Yeah.
disparity here is so great. And so you tell me, if your average healthcare worker can't afford to live in the community in which they're serving, if the average police officer or firefighter or teacher can't afford, and has to live, 30, 40, 50, 60 miles away because it's the only place that they can afford,
Yeah.
and then they have to pay for gas and all those other things. How are we going to sustain the community that we, this is just crazy. And again, I think the one clear way that we can help families is if we can get them into home ownership. Then that is a multi-generational game changer for those families, where they have reap the benefits of that generational, multi-generational wealth that occurred as a result of building equity in a home.
And what frustrates me as a guy is I saw someone on Twitter, tweet that, 15 bucks an hour is right at 31,000. And they said that, and, a starting teacher in Texas only makes about that. And so we're supposed to pay people at McDonald's the same money we're paying someone who's gotten a 4-year degree, and a teaching certificate. And rightly so, he got, you know, pulverized with, that's the wrong point. How do you
Right.
see that statement and go, oh, we should pay teachers more, not we should keep things, and
Right.
and
Right.
a rising
Well,
tide raises all boats. I know it's a
yeah.
cliche, but the reality is, if you own
Right.
a home, you're
Well,
going to be a better citizen, and
right.
therefore you'll be
And
more productive.
the reality of it is, you can't go, you know, McDonald's wants to hire a starting wage, a starting worker. They're paying close, when all is said and done, they're paying close and probably over $15 an hour when you
Yeah.
add benefits, and
Right.
insurance and any kind of retirement fund or any of those things. So the idea that you can hire somebody for less than $15 an hour, I mean, you can argue about whether that should include benefits and various things, but you tell any employer and they're probably paying closer to 22 or 23 bucks for an entry
Yeah,
level worker, because because the market's tight. I mean,
it is.
so that's what people are paying. So it's a little disingenuous to suggest that people shouldn't have to pay 15 bucks an hour because they're already paying that or
Yeah.
close to it. Second of all, I don't know about you, but if you say that teaching is the most important profession, you know what you value by what you're willing to pay for it. And
Yes.
if we're only paying our teachers 30,000 bucks an hour, it tells me that you don't actually believe that
Right.
teaching is the most important profession. And if you're going to continue to make it impossible for a teacher to live
Yes.
on the salary that he or she receives in wages, then you can't expect to continue to attract a quality pool. I mean, people will do it and they'll do it for a short period of time, but at some point, the strains and the stresses of it, people go, I can go, be a clerk at a department store and make more money than this.
Yeah, and I do believe there are people that have a calling to be an educator, but
Absolutely.
we're stretching them far on that.
Well, why should we torture them
Exactly. Yeah.
because they want to do what I
Yeah,
couldn't have
exactly.
been a teacher. And I was really glad that my children were blessed with a great public education.
Well, and absolutely. And what frustrates me and is that we're seeing all this during this pandemic, right? That parents are having to do teaching and they're having to do it, and they fight this. And we're seeing, as you said, someone without a home, worried about their rent and everything. And there is just, um, we need to do better. And I think
Yeah.
people like yourselves
Well,
and this, these kind of organizations are trying to do that.
well, and I think my frustration when you hear it from folks that say, well, I earned all this on my own. And I'm like, well, let's really analyze this thing, right? Did you
Yeah.
really earn it on your own, or what help did you get along? What role? Well, I started a trucking firm and I did this all on my own. Well, how did those trucks travel between states? Oh, on roads that were built by government. Oh, I get it.
Yes.
I see. Oh, okay. And almost anything, this idea
Yeah.
that I did it all on my own and I didn't need any government support. I mean, farmers that, look at, the backbone of our country and of our globe.
Yeah.
But the idea that, I did this all on my own. Well, there was a lot of support for farmers when they,
Yeah.
whether it was dairy price supports or whatever. That doesn't mean, and I'm not in any way implying that not deservedly so,
Yeah.
but don't tell me that that other people are deserving when you've had assistance and help in being, getting where you were at,
Yeah.
even if you're still struggling, it's so frustrating because there's, and I think it's been particularly exacerbated over the last 4 years, an us versus them mentality.
Hmm.
And I think that, getting back to the topic at hand, I mean, I think Bruce in his songs realizes that yes, there is individualism and there are, individual decisions and responsibilities, but that collectively, if we're going to be the land of hope and dreams, we can't be the land of us versus them.
And I think well said, Chris, that, we I know we take care of our own, he says with his tongue firmly in cheek, but the reality is that is what we should do, right? To the least of these. And
Yeah.
so well said, sir, well said. To going back to Bruce, are there songs or albums that you turn to on a regular basis, either to help you cope with stress or to celebrate or get you through tough times?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, having been reared on Born to Run, that
Yeah.
that album continues to, I'm still a believer that Thunder Road is my favorite. I kind of hard to get beyond
Sure.
what that song meant to me growing up. So I kind of like that, but I really I think Nebraska is one of the finest albums.
Sure.
I mean, I just really, I just found that amazing because
Yeah.
it felt like such a departure, and yet really channeled Woody Guthrie and
Yeah,
all of the
exactly.
songs of
Mhm.
just a amazing amazing album. So I love a lot of the stuff on that. The River, once you get going, it's kind of hard to say. Uh,
Yeah.
they're just, some of it's just kind of dependent on what mood you're in at any
Yeah,
particular time.
absolutely. Yeah.
But if I'm melancholy, uh, a lot of the songs from the River sing to me.
Yeah, I could get that. I could see that a lot. Absolutely. Um, so before we get to the Mary question, what have I not asked you I should have, Chris?
Well, it's been, first of all, really fun to just kind of reminisce and think about that. I mean, it
Good.
does kind of remind me of back when I was 18 or 19 years old, sitting around listening to the Wild, the Innocent, and the E Street Shuffle, talking about these songs,
Absolutely.
and then the offshoots of Southside Johnny and various things.
Yeah.
Talk to Me is one of my favorite Bruce songs that that
Yeah.
he didn't get famous for. And there's a couple of course, Because the Night and some of those things,
Hmm.
but it's been fun, and it's I really was struck reading Bruce's biography
Yeah.
about how the challenges that he faced in his life and
Yes.
faces in his life. And I think it's really important for people to understand. They see this guy who's one of the greatest performers of all time, and you think everything is is cake and frosting and all of
Yeah.
those things, and I just I'm very appreciative and aware of the struggle, and that the line in Springsteen on Broadway where he's um, I forget exactly how he said it, but he's describing his father as his
Yeah.
father was the one through which he could see the window through which he could see all of the all of the horrors in life or whatever.
Yeah.
And then he said, but my mother was the person who kept me from jumping through it.
Yeah. That line from The Wish where he talks about that. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I know that I was really impressed with the candor Bruce shared
Mhm.
about his depression and the demons he fought. And even
Yeah.
when he was success, when he talked about his first marriage and how he totally took ownership of that. And the idea that um, his struggles and worries, that was he going to be the kind of father that his father was, and the other thing. So yeah, I agree, it was just really beautiful. Are your siblings fans?
Um, not anywhere near what I am,
Okay.
for sure. I mean, my brother, who's a musician,
Mhm.
absolutely, but he was more of a world beat reggae
Yeah.
guy. His guy was
Yeah.
Bob Marley.
Mhm.
And I'm probably uh, I'm not the professional musician, but I'm the most kind of musically
Okay.
interested of the rest of the siblings. So
Yeah. And the
my,
your
my my oldest brother could sing any Irish rebel song that was ever
yeah,
put to paper, but
that sounds fun. Did
yeah,
how about your children? You've mentioned at least going to a couple of shows with you.
yeah, yep. Interestingly, because both my kids are really into music, and I don't listen to a lot of the stuff they listen
Yeah.
to. Um, but I took my son. I haven't taken my daughter to a Bruce show, but I took my son, and just like, you have to go.
Hmm.
And I think that he was blown away. I will say, I don't think he went out and downloaded every Bruce album or
Yeah.
anything like that, but he came away in awe. And so,
Mhm.
I appreciated having that opportunity to share that show with him.
Yeah, that's nice. What's
Yeah.
today on the sports station I listened to, there was a whole segment on why do we why do we raise our children to support the sports teams we support, even though we know we're setting them up for sadness, right? And
Heartbreak.
yeah, heartbreak.
Exactly.
And this
Yeah.
specifically,
Hey,
yeah,
you're talking to a Vikings fan who has passed the sickness to his son. So
yes.
please, I
Well,
can
and
understand that.
my son, I was listening to the segment, and at the red light, I texted my son, like, "Are you listening to the tick? Are you listening?" And then um, he called me and said, "Dad, were you listening?" I said, "Did you not see my text?" He goes, "No." He said, "I hadn't yet." He said, "This is us." He said, um, funny story. He was born in '89. He tells everyone he was born during the Landry era. Like Tom Landry did
Uh,
not get fired for like 2 weeks after he was born. So he says, "I'm a Landry baby. I'm a Landry baby."
I'm a Lander guy. Yeah.
Yeah, and so he was the NFC Championship game against the Cowboys were playing San Francisco, and they were down 21-0 right away. Barry Switzer's first year as a coach, and he started crying that they were doing. He was very young, right? He's like 4 or 5, and my wife looked at me like, "You did this to him. You did this to him."
Yeah.
And so now then, at 31, he just is. Every year, he's like, "I just want to get to the NFC Championship game." Like, I don't even
Yeah.
worry about the Super Bowl right now. If I could just get to the NFC Championship game, we would
Yeah.
care. And so, absolutely.
Well, that was after one of the Vikings crushingly stupid defeats in the playoffs a couple of years
Yeah.
ago. I think it was when they shanked a 20-yard field goal to win it against Seattle. And my son calls me up and goes, "Well, Dad, I guess I'm a Minnesotan today."
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So, the reason I brought that up is um, Bruce has not disappointed my son though. Like he has embraced that. And I always make that joke. I said, um, like I won't wear a cowboy jersey. Some Sundays I'll wear a Springsteen shirt. And I'm like, Springsteen never disappoints me. You know?
Does not disappoint.
Yeah,
No,
absolutely.
that's right. Yeah.
All right. Chris, this has been great. Before we wrap it up, I've got to ask you the Mary question. So for those of you who may not have heard the show before, and I hope you've enjoyed our discussion with Chris. Jay Armstrong is an honors English teacher. He just recently retired, but for many years he taught honors English, and his seniors, they would take 2 days and they would study Thunder Road. They would go through all the lyrics, go through the imagery, kind of compare it to Robert Frost, The Road Not Taken. And then at the end of the 2 days, he would look at his class and say, does Mary get in the car at the end of Thunder Road? So, Chris, that is your question. Do you think Mary gets in the car?
I have a hard time with the question because I can't imagine any other scenario under which that song could have ended other than her getting in the car. And of course, the sad tragedy of it is he got Mary pregnant, and that was all she wrote.
Yep.
For his
Absolutely.
19th birthday, he got a card and a wedding coat. So, I mean, that I assume that she got in the car and it didn't work out long term.
You know, the other thing someone brought up is that if you listen to Racing in the Street, they talk about my baby's on her daddy's porch, and he goes, is that the porch that she walked on listening to Roy Orbison? And I said, I bet you it is. So yeah, really well put.
Well, I wonder if you went back to when it was the original version of it, when it was Wings for Wheels or something like that. Is there any tell in that?
I don't know. It's funny is someone said, well, if you ever get Bruce, then you'd have the answer. And I go, well, no, because
he ain't gonna tell you.
Yeah, and also the idea, Isaac Asimov was doing a lecture, and he was talking about a story, and someone in the hall raised his hand and said, Dr. Asimov, I don't think that's what the story's about. And Asimov said, I wrote the story. Of course, that's what it's about. And the fan said, just because you wrote it, what makes you think you know what it's about? Right. And Asimov said, I think you're right. Yeah. And so I think Bruce knows what he meant, but I think 60-40, 60% say yes, 40% of the people I ask say no.
Yeah. Well, it's like going back to my intro to theater class and many years ago and talking about Waiting for Godot. Well, what do you think happened?
Yeah, exactly.
And it doesn't matter, quite frankly, what the author said. It's what it says to you.
Absolutely.
And I think that's probably true.
I absolutely agree. So a couple things. One, if someone wants to help with the habit, humanity habitat. I'm drawing a blank for the humanity. Yeah, Habitat for Humanity.
Habitat for Humanity.
Yeah. Yep. How do just look for their local chapter and donate?
Yep. There is likely to be a local affiliate in their community because there's 1,300. And you can not only donate, but more importantly, you can go out and swing a hammer. I said, if Jimmy Carter in his 90s can go out and help build a house, you can too. And so, whether you're a faith group or a work group or whatever, contact your local affiliate. Of course, you're always willing to send money directly to Twin Cities Habitat for Humanity. Yes. And then there's the international that supports the mission across the globe. We have built millions of houses for folks in devastated flood areas and in areas of intense poverty. And it really is truly a global mission. And the most core of what we as fellow human beings should do for other fellow human beings.
Absolutely. And I was lucky enough in 2019, my wife and I took a long weekend and went to Atlanta, and we were able to tour the presidential library there. Mm-hmm. And President Carter, pretty badass as an ex-president. I mean, talk about using your life to be so pretty amazing.
Yeah, I think he's underrated as an actual president, but
Yeah,
he clearly is second to none in terms of an ex-president.
absolutely. All right. Any other final thoughts?
Well, I tell you, just what a blast. Thanks, Jesse, for bringing me on, and I hope you get Bruce someday.
I hope so too. I appreciate it. I'm gonna shoot Betsy a quick email telling her I appreciate it. If
Yep.
someone wants to reach you, what's the best way they can?
Chris.Coleman at
Okay.
tchfh.com
All right.
or .org. Sorry,
Okay, very
.org.
nice.
Yeah.
All right. All right. Well, listeners, you please be safe. Remember to wash your hands. Remember to social distance. Wear an effing mask. Let's be good to each other because really, that's the only way we're going to get through this. And Chris, thank you. Listeners, thank you. And we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you.
Doing a podcast at times can be a one-way conversation, and I hate that. So please let me know what you like and don't like about the work I'm doing. You can reach the podcast via email at setlistingbruce@gmail.com. The show is on Twitter at setlistingbruce, and my personal Twitter is at jessejacksondfw. We have a website, www.setlistingbruce.com. From there, you can find links to other Springsteen podcasts as well as other music-themed podcasts. We have a page devoted to our own SLB All-Star Band. These are guests who have been on the podcast more than 3 times. There is a link to our store where you can purchase Set Listing Bruce shirts as well as a Mary Question t-shirt. There is a link to our Patreon page where you can sign up to help support the podcast financially. We have different levels and different rewards based on your support. If you don't have any extra cash, and right now who does, you can support the podcast by subscribing via your favorite podcast player and leaving us a review. The more reviews we have, the easier it is for people to find us. And please tell a friend about the podcast, especially if they love Bruce or music, because it will make a difference. You just heard the fun talking, hard rocking, music loving, album ranking, fan thinking, joy spreading, lyric reading, story sharing podcast that is the one, the only Set Listing Bruce. Set Listing Bruce is part of the Southgate Media podcast group. The theme for Set Listing Bruce was written by David Rosen, used by permission.